everyone, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and today we're going to continue on with our series of making a Lilly Rose Dolls character. And we're working on Harvey the Hedgehog, which is my character, but as I've tried to say within the other videos, the body, the legs and the arms are all pretty much the same for a lot of the characters, and obviously at the time of filming that was the case. I think there's just Hartley Hare who's slightly different on his legs, but the construction methods are still the same, so we're going to carry on with that so you can apply this to any of the characters that you're making and just use those principles and the tips and tricks to apply to the character that you're making and the pattern pieces that you have, and that was the idea for this series of videos anyway. So we've already made our body. And in the earlier videos, we've been talking about the pattern, how to trace it, how to add seam allowance to it, and then how to cut out the felt. And we've got our limbs here now that are waiting to be sewn. So today we're going to concentrate on the legs, and we're just going to do the two legs today. We'll then move on and do the arms. I'm then going to film the video for the head, and then we'll sew it all together. So there'll be a specific video for each of the characters' heads, because those are what make the characters absolutely individual, and then we'll then do a video to sew it all together, because I just like to put my head on before I put the rest of the limbs on the body. I think it just sort of helps it all make sense. I hope it does for you too. But anyway, that's the order of things that we're going to do, so let me tilt the camera down and we'll get started. We just get back up to speed with where we are. We've cut out our legs and I've got two pairs here. I've got my pin in the top to tell me which is the right side of each of my characters. And whilst felt doesn't necessarily have a right side and a wrong side, sometimes you just find that there's a slight colour difference or a difference in the mottling, or there's a difference just in the way that the felt lays. And so I do try to make sure that when I cut it out on the flat, as we did in the earlier video, then I always try to mark my top of my top side, the right side that I want on the outside of my character, so that that's all the same. I don't want half the face having a slightly different effect to the other, because obviously you only notice that once you've finished it all, so we don't want that to happen. Okay, so we've got two pairs of legs, two left and two right, and then if you remember, we got that by turning a pattern piece over. So we had one pattern piece with the writing up and one pattern piece with the writing down, and that will then give you your left and your right when you're cutting out on the level. Okay, so there we've got all those ready to go. I'm just going to take one pair at a time, and then I'm going to paying attention to, I haven't got them right, have I? I've got them one left and one right, that's better. So one left and one right, so we've got the toes pointing to each other, and that'll make sure we've got them the right way around. I'm then going to put them so that they're facing sides together. There's two ways. In the way Claire makes a slit in the felt, so let's do that, and let's make a slit in our felt for turning it round on this leg, and then on the other leg we're going to do it the same way as we did the body, where we leave a gap in the back. And I'm just going to see which we prefer, but I just thought for those that want to follow true to the pattern, then you'll need to know how to do this. So just choose one of your legs for now, and then we need to get our snips or our scissors. And if we just fold, the slit is in the upper thigh here, so if we just fold that in half, and then we can then put a slit into the felt. Hopefully that should be enough. We can always make it bigger if we need to, but I don't want to make it too big. If you feel nervous about doing this and then slip stitching it closed at the end, just wait till I make the other leg, and I'm going to ladder stitch that one closed. So now that we've got the little slit in the felt there at the top of the thigh, I'm actually going to turn these round now, so I've got right sides together, and then I can remove my pins once I'm holding it together, right sides together, because it would be very easy to get these mixed up. Right, let's just pop some pins in just to hold this together, and I've lined these shapes up so they match each other perfectly. If you are doing the sewing method where you're matching up your seams and your stitching line because you've not used a 1/4 inch seam allowance around your legs, then you will just need to follow the same way that you did for the body, where you are putting the pin through so it goes through on the stitching line and comes out on the stitching line. You'll then need to tack around all the way around for your stitching line as well, so that you mark that with your stitches, and then you'll sew over that with your sewing machine. But for me, the way that I preferred to do it was I added 1/4 inch seam allowance, an exact 1/4 inch seam allowance around, and I'm going to sew it with an exact 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that should give us the same size that we should need then for the pattern to be replicated. So my machine is all set up. I've got a Schmetz Microtex needle in. I think this one's a size 80. I've got it on a straight stitch, and I'm going to take my straight stitch down in length from a 2.2, which is my standard construction, and I think I went down to 1.8. So it just takes it down to a slightly smaller stitch so that it's just got a little bit more integrity on that seam, which I've got just here. And then I'm going to pay attention to where the 1/4 inch or the 1/2 centimetre mark is, and then I just pop it my seam gauge behind my needle, and then I just keep an eye on my needle as I move it across towards the right until I've got a 1/4 inch or 1/2 centimetre seam allowance on the side there. And a 5.5 position gives me that, but it might be different on your machine. And then once I've finished, I can use the edge of my presser foot. So I'm going to use this side just here and run that along my raw edges, just directly across from where that hole is there for my needle to go through. Then that will give me my 1/4 inch seam allowance. Pretty much. I mean, obviously, it isn't as precise as if you use a 1/4 inch foot, but sometimes they can be a little bit more difficult, tricky to use if you're not quilting. It's fine on straight edges, but we've got curves here, haven't we? So I'm going to line my fabric up now, so it's resting on the edge of my presser foot. I'm not going to watch my needle. I'm just going to watch the edge of my presser foot all the way along the edge of this edge of the raw fabric, and then we'll be able to stitch. And so just do a few stitches forward and a few stitches back. And then if you've got the function on your machine, then you use your needle down, and your needle will always then stay in your work. So then we're just going to follow round the edges of the curves, stopping to take our pins out. I don't sew over pins. And then we're coming up to where it's too severe of a curve in order for me just to move the fabric. So I'm going to leave my needle in the work, lift up the presser foot, and just move my work. Because that needle is anchoring that piece of felt down, or those pieces of felt down, then I can change the angle of my fabric in order that I can get this lovely curve around the top of the leg there. So we're just going to pivot just slowly as we go round, and just do a few stitches, and then we move it again. You're trying to avoid having any straight lines really on your character at the top here. You want it to be nice and rounded to give that nice hip and thigh look. Coming up to another pin, let's take that out. And then again we're going to pivot, but now the other way round, so that we can sew this seam just here. It's just slight movements at a time. I've got another pin to take out there. But it just helps just get that nice curve. Into another pin, let's just take that out. No, apologies for my squeaky pedal, which I probably hadn't noticed until now, and now you won't be able to hear anything else. So round to the bottom of the foot, and that's straight across on the bottom there. It's nice and easy. So we can just start to move around the back of the heel now. Final pin out, and then because we have got the slit in the top of the thigh, we're going to sew this right back to where we started. We'll just overlap those stitches slightly, and then we can take off our starting and our stopping threads. Okay, so if I just show you this, we've got one lovely sewn curve here. Also, Miss car alarm's going off in the car park. And that's all the way lovely and neat all the way around there as well. So when we turn this through, we just need to put some little snips in the curve here and this internal curve just there. So we're just going to put, because that allows the felt just to spread out slightly to give it a nice finish. So you're going to use just the blade. Don't go like this when you're snipping these, because it's so easy just to jog and just to miss and make a much bigger cut. So you just use the blade, and then we're just doing some little snips into the edge there, so that when we pull it out, look, it can flatten out, and that's what we want. We want this to be able to spread out. So you don't need too many, but just need just around where that curve is, up to but not through the stitches. And if you wanted to, you could also use pinking shears, which are these scissors here with the triangular blades. And if you wanted to, you could just take a little bit off here on the top as well. Just anywhere where there's a outside curve, then you can just take a little bit off. It sometimes helps it just to lie flatter. So just take a little bit off like that. We've got another little curve just here, so let's just do a few more snips just on the back edge just here. Okay, so once we've got to that point there, let me just get rid of these little bits of felt before they end up everywhere. And then all we need to do then is very carefully, let's put our thumb inside our hole, pull the two sides apart. Let's go all the way down to the bottom. I tend to go down into the toe. And then I'll hold on with my fingers. I've got my thumb inside and my finger on the outside. And if I clutch those two together, then I can start to ease the felt over my fingers without losing track of where I am. Just pull that felt down. And eventually you'll be able to look through the gap and be able to see enough so that you can hold on to it. And I tend to find that you're better off pushing, if you can, than you are pulling. So I'm holding on to that end and doing a little bit of pressure on it, but most of the pressure is coming from below here, where I'm actually manipulating the felt in order for it to go over the edge there. That's it. And there it goes. So turning it through was quite easy with that slit, and I'll measure it and let you know how big I did, and we'll see whether that's bigger than Claire did on the pattern, the designer. I did about 1.5 inches my slit was, so that's there. Hasn't stretched too much with going out, with pulling it through. And then we can use the curved end of the seam gauge, if we're careful, not the pointy end, using the curved edge to just push through and just to get all of those seams all nicely rolled out. So you're just wanting all your stitches to be onto the edge there. I mean, they'll come out a little bit more when you actually stuff this. That was the word I wanted, wasn't it? Took a while to come to me. And then we'll be then moving this around. That's it. So yeah, getting all those edges to the side there. So what I'm going to do, I'll finish off this one first, I think, and then we'll move on to the other one and the other method of doing it, and then we can then talk about that. So let me get my stuffing and we'll get this one stuffed. Okay, so we've got some stuffing. This is just polyester fibre fill type of stuffing, and we've got our leg, and we're just going to take some of the stuffing and just start to introduce that into the slit that we've left in the top of the leg. And then in small bits, we're just going to push this right down so that it goes down and into the toe first. It's much easier to stuff this as you go along than to compact it all. So to go into the furthest parts first, rather than to compact it all and it then gets stuck and you can't get past the ankle. So smallish bits of felt, and then direct those down into where you want your furthermost parts away from your opening first. Oh, and the fluff does get in your nose too. And just be careful, just be aware that you've got a clear working space, because you don't want to pick up any pins that get tangled in with your stuffing and then inadvertently get a pin caught in the centre of your character's leg, because you might be giving it a cuddle one day and find yourself with a bit of a puncture wound. Okay, let's pop this down into the leg and start and build that up. Well, you might tell as well that I'm wrapping up a little bit more. It's now gone, well, we've gone through autumn now. It's in December, and it gets quite cold here in Spain in actual fact. I mean, cold in relative terms, not for some people around the world, I know, but in terms of for the Spanish people. So we're into long sleeves and jeans and boots. And because it's a bit of a cloudy day, if the sun comes out and you're in the sun, it's really warm. So you tend to find that in Spain they dress a lot in layers so that they can strip off if they need to. And just catch those rays if they can. Okay, so we've got a nice foot there that's getting nice and firm. And we need the feet to be nice and firm because that's what makes them stand. So let's just get some more stuffing here. And as I said with the body, you'll be surprised how much these can actually take, these characters. Just keep pushing it down, and you want to have a really, really nice firm foot. That toe's a little bit understuffed, so again, let's just try and just push some of that down and into that toe. This is why the closer together stitches help, because it just makes those seams really strong and robust. So we don't want any popping seams anywhere. I'm just supporting the ankle with my hand, and that then gives a nice tube to be able to stuff everything down into. The back of the heel just needs a little bit more. And you're just feeling just to get it nice and firm. That's quite firm, hopefully you can tell. Just a bit further up here, a little bit towards the top as well. And I'm going to put some into the top here so that we've got a nice top of our thigh. So as I say, we need these joints to be nice and strong because that's going to be the base on which the whole character stands. And we know that from the Clara that I made that, and those videos are already on the YouTube channel for her clothes and for her body and for her head and hat and, well, it's a bonnet, isn't it really? So we're just making sure that that's going to be, I think I need a little bit more, because of course the thigh is where it attaches to the body, so we want it to be nice and firm. Can cause problems when you're trying to sew things shut, but for now I want to go on the side of being lovely and firm. We can soon move the felt around behind the stitches if we need to when we've actually got it sewn up. So just compressing this stuffing in. It's like magic, it's just disappearing. So just for now I'm just going to make sure I've got the sides of the felt out so we've not got anything tucked in and behind. Let me just get a quick pin, and I'm just going to put a pin through this just to hold it together for me whilst I get my needle and thread together, if I can. Probably should have had that ready already, but I wanted to jump straight in. You know what it's like. That's holding for the moment. Okay, let's get a piece of thread and a hand sewing needle. I'm going to have my thread double. Okay, so I've got a thread double, got a knot at the end, and I've got a hand sewing needle. And what I'm going to do now is take the leg, it's nice and firmly stuffed, make sure that ankle's nice and firm. And then I'm going to just start just below where the slit was in the opening there. So I'm just going to start and just do some stitches across just to attach this together, just so that we've got somewhere for that thread to be anchored down onto first. I'm going to take the pin out because I've got my thumb there holding the fabric together. I'm just going to do a series of just slip stitches across the, or semi-ladder stitches just across the opening. But rather than pull it together with a seam, because there isn't any seam allowance on that section, I'm just going to do stitches fairly close together across the gap and just pulling the raw edges together. This will go on the inside thigh, I think, on the inside of the leg. So we'll need to make sure, well, the other one will be done slightly differently. So on this one, because we'll do the other one with leaving a gap, and then sewing it on the seam. It just depends what you prefer, because the gap on the seam will be covered by the clothes anyway, and these are dolls. These dolls are not going to be played with and dressed and undressed, so I don't have a concern that you're going to see that seam at all. So I'm just doing some little stitches just either side, just stitching it up. So I'm just doing a stitch on the left hand side first. Just show you just like that. And then undo that stitch, and then I'm coming across to the right hand side, and then I'm doing a stitch on the right hand side as well, just the same. And that gives you a ladder of threads across the front top here, and then when you tighten that up, cinch it in, and it pulls the two sides together. So it is sealing up quite nicely. It's my first time doing it like this. Normally I just leave a gap in the seam and then do a ladder stitch to seal it up that way. You have to make sure you get a decent bite of your felt though, because there's quite a lot of tension on the fibres with the felt. And just keep tucking that stuffing in. And if you think you get to this stage and you need any more going in, then just pop some more in. You can keep adding some more until it's completely sealed. But I'm not pulling it so that it's taking away any of the width of the leg at all. I'm just doing it so that it can, the raw edges are butting up against each other. And the opening did stretch a little bit whilst we were filling it with the stuffing, but that's unavoidable. So just coming down to the end here, let's just use the point of the needle just to stuff that stuffing in. Hand stitching does take time, but it is worth it to get that nice effect when it's all done. I think I'll just go down again after this and just make sure that I've got that as neat as I can. So sometimes when you're making these stitches, you can see little gaps where you think, I could do that a little bit neater. So you can just run back down again and just make sure that your needle's going in and out where you want those extra stitches to be. That's better. Got that top cinched in a little bit more. And also the more stitches you've got in, the more robust it'll be. But as I say, if the characters aren't going to be played with, and these are designed as heirloom characters, aren't they, for sitting on a shelf, then we just need to have it enough so that we can get them, it'll stand up to display purposes. Okay, it's gone quite well. Pretty good. We get down to the bottom down here. I'm just going to do a few stitches in place. That's my seam finished. It's not too horrendous. Just looks like it's had a hip replacement. Okay. Let's do a few stitches in place in the felt just to anchor that thread down, and then we're going to leave a long tail. You know, I like to leave a long tail on my threads so that it can't come undone. So on the last stitch here, I'm just going to do a little surgeon's knot. So I put my needle through the work. Going to wrap my loose thread around twice, then holding that tight to my needle, and I'm going to pull that through, and that's quite a nice robust knot. And then I'm going to bury my needle right in where it came out and go all the way through the character so it comes out the opposite side to where you've been stitching, because then if you put a little bit of tension on your thread, just do this so hopefully you can see, when you put a little bit of tension on the thread and then snip through the thread, that thread goes straight inside inside your character, and then it's got a long tail, so it's less likely to come unstitched. Actually, I think that does look pretty good. Actually, it seems to flatten it off as well slightly, so I'm happy with that as a foot. It's not going to stand up on its own at the moment, but it will do when it's connected to the character, which we'll be doing in a later video. Okay, so Let me just get my parts together and we'll move on to the second leg. So we've got our second leg here, a left and a right, because we've got the toes pointing to each other, and I've got the right sides up with my pins on. So I'm going to put these two now, right sides together, and I'm going to just match up the raw edges as best as I can. I'm then going to take the pins out from the middle here, because I'm pinching it together, so I know I've got my right sides together. And then we're going to use these pins now to put in through the felt. If it doesn't go through, just give it a twist and it should go through. Just put 2 or 3 pins in just to hold this together. But I'm going to take 2 red pins and I'm going to put that on the back there, one there and one there, leaving about an inch and a half. Let's have a look and see. Inch and a half open, just to be able to stitch that shut afterwards, and then I'm going to pin around the rest of it. So the red pin trick is quite simple. It just basically means it's an indicator to me that that's where I've got to start and stop sewing. It does help sometimes depending on if you remember or not, but generally speaking it's a bit of a reminder. So just put in as many pins as you need. And then we're going to do pretty much the same as what we've already done, but we're going to start at 1 red pin and sew all the way around, and we're going to stop at the 2nd red pin. So I'll come back to you when I've done that, because the pivoting is exactly the same as in the earlier video. Okay, so here we've got the leg, or again all pivoted round, but this time we've got the gap left that we left in between our red pins. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to snip into the seam allowance on the internal curves, so the ones that curve inwards, just to help those turn out and lay flat when we get there. So just on either side of the ankle there. Just be careful not to go through your stitches. If you do by mistake go through your stitches, just put it back into your machine and just take a little bit more seam allowance at that point and you should be fine. Just take a little bit off the top of this one with this pinking shears, because we did that on the last one. I don't ever trim anything off where the opening is. I always leave all of that seam allowance, just leave that intact. Okay, once that's all done, you can use these little bits as well just to go in with your stuffing if you wanted to, if you want zero waste. Okay, and then we're going to put a thumb in again like we did before on the other one. This time we're going through the hole in the seam, down to the bottom there, finger and thumb together, and then just start and ease that felt over your finger and thumb and towards the opening. And through the ankle. You might have your own way, or you might have some turning tools. You can get some turning tools, can't you, to do this job as well. It's just pushing the felt through on top of itself so that you can get it through. Okay, so once you've got your leg turned out like the other one, you'll have a gap in the back on the seam here. That's fine. We're going to use that now in order to stuff the leg. Just as you're stuffing this one, we're going to stuff the foot again like we did before. Just try and hold them up against each other and just have a little squeeze and a feel to see. So I can feel this one slightly firmer than this one at the moment. So I know I've got more to go into it. So you're just trying to even them up as you go along. We don't want one foot bigger than the other, although everybody's perfectly unsymmetrical, aren't we, sometimes? But let's just try and get our characters as symmetrical as we can, because it will help them standing if we do that. And the other thing that you can do if you want to sort of take it to the nth degree is that you can actually weigh your characters' limbs individually. That's much better now. Weigh them individually and just get them so that they weigh the same. The stuffing's very light, but you'll see a difference on electronic scales if they're not quite got as much stuffing in as each other. So that's another thing that you can do if you wish to. I don't bother weighing mine, but I do know some people who do. So it is just a personal preference. And then once we've finished stuffing this in exactly the same way, making sure you go right up into that thigh as well, because that's where the leg is going to be anchored onto the body. Then we'll go ahead and we'll do a ladder stitch in order to close this back of this leg up on the seam. Now, also, just while I've got your attention and before you sort of jump off, is that if I wouldn't recommend that you sew these legs directly onto the body at this stage. I would keep all of your limbs to one side and I would attach your head first for your character, because these characters balance and are freestanding. Once that you want the head to be on as the correct orientation, I don't mean sort of like front and back to front. I just mean in terms of like a head tilt, that type of thing, for when you're attaching that, just to make sure that you've actually got the centre of balance correct along the length of the body, so that you won't then have one that sort of tilts to one side or the head looks like it's slightly off kilter. So that was just a quick tip, just to say don't jump ahead and sew these straight on. So this one's all now sewn up. Let me get my needle and thread again. Put a knot on the end here. Oops, get my thread in the end. No, I've not got a knot on the end there. Do a quick one. It's funny how your hands go soft after holding on to all of the felt. Okay, and so when I'm working along a seam like this one, I'll put my needle so it comes in a few millimetres down the seam line. So it's a bit like that. Can you see where that's coming out? Hopefully you can. And I do a couple of stitches in place there, which will then anchor that thread for me and anchor that knot, so there's not too much pressure on the knot and so it doesn't then pull through. Just a couple of stitches and it just helps secure that. Then make sure your seam allowance is folded out so you can see where you're working with on your gap, because it does have a tendency to fold back in again, because now you're going to imagine your 1/4 inch seam allowance along this raw edge, so that as we go to take a stitch, I'm going to come across to the right first, so just keep that stuffing out of the way with your thumb. And I'm going to take a little stitch on the edge of the seam allowance on the right, and then I'm going to go to the left and take a stitch just at the end of where those other stitches were that we did on the machine. And you're going to do a thread that spans across the gap. Come back to the right again and do another stitch. And it can be tricky, let me put my glasses down, it can be tricky to get them close enough, because you're trying to get a decent enough bite of the felt to keep the seam intact, and then across to the left again. And you can do about 4 or 5 stitches. You're trying to keep to that 1/4 inch seam allowance to keep it even, and you'll end up with this bridge of threads just here. Can you see those all underneath there? And then what happens then is, if when you pull on the threads, that will tighten up and take it back to the seam for you. A little bit of a bump there, but we can smooth that out later. So you're just trying to keep to your seam allowance all the way along. It's exactly the same stitches we used in the back of the body, so if you've already watched that video, then you'll know this technique anyway. It's called a ladder stitch because the stitches look like the rungs of a ladder. That's the theory. So 4 or 5 stitches, and then just stitch that, pull that in. And we're just going to go all the way along to the end. And then when I get to the end, I just do a couple of stitches past the end onto the machine stitches, and that just seems to anchor that thread again and just make sure that it's not going to pull out. It just takes away the pressure on that pressure point. You get quite quick at this when you've done a few. And just use your thumb just to depress the felt if you need to, just so you can get your needle in and out. Tuck in your stuffing so that's not going to be out of the way. If you do get any little whiskers of stuffing out on the edge, you can just snip those off with your snips. Just be careful not to snip through any of your felt though. Need a couple more stitches at the top just there. And just go a couple of stitches back through at the top here just to anchor that down. And then should you wish, you can go a few stitches back down again, and then you can go along. If you've got some little fluffs like this, look, can you see? I just take my scissors and hold it parallel with the edge and just snip those off. Just make sure you don't go through any of your threads that you've already snipped, and that will take off that fuzziness for you and just make that nice and neat. It's inevitable because the stuffing is just so fibrous, then it does, again, just poke out occasionally. So again, I'm just going down my felt just to reinforce that seam. Just taking a stitch one side and then a stitch the other side, just to reinforce it, and then I will then do a few stitches in place at the end, and then I will then do this little surgeon's knot at the end just to hold on to that thread and bury my thread, give it a long tail by pushing the needle in through the character's leg and come out the other side, and that will then make sure that there's a nice long tail on there, so it's not going to unravel quite nice and easily. I just think if there's a short tail, sometimes it can unravel itself a little more easily. So surgeon's knot round the needle twice and hold on to it. So hold it nice and tight, then in through the character's leg. Make sure you can see where it's coming out first before you lose sight of it. Don't want to have to undo all your stitches. And then a nice bit of pressure on the thread and it will come out. So there's the leg done both ways. There's the side with the slit, and there's the edge with the seam sewn upon the edge. And I think if I had a character where it had a short skirt on and no pantaloons, I think I would use the side with the idea with the slit like that. I think if your character is going to have long pantaloons on or have a long skirt or dress on or trousers, then I would possibly do this again. But I'm quite impressed with that way, actually. That does give a nice finish. So now we've got two even legs, and if we stand them up next to each other, they will actually stand. Oops, they were doing. Yeah, they will stand. So that's good. It's a good start. They're the same length, they're the same thickness on the ankles as well, which is good. So I'm quite happy with those, and the ankles are quite nice and firm. So that's our legs done for now. So let me just turn the camera around and I'll have a quick chat and then we'll get on to the arms. And so there we have it, our two legs. So we now have our body and our two legs done. So they're ready to be stitched onto the character. But as I said in the video just earlier, I wouldn't stitch these on immediately onto your body because we want the head to go on first so we can get that sense of balance right. So that would be my suggestion. Obviously you can do whichever way you like, but that would be my suggestion, is that you hang on and you just wait until we've got the head on there. So enough for today. I hope you've enjoyed the video. It'll get more exciting as we start sewing onto the clothes. There's a lot more detail in the clothes, but hopefully these shorter videos will give you an idea of my teaching style, the types of tips and tricks that I like to include, and hopefully they're enjoyable to you. I think the feedback has been really good on my videos so far. People like the detail, I have to say, especially beginners or those who are slightly less confident then seem to like the detail, so that's all good. And if you're more experienced, just have me on double speed or zoom through the videos, or just do it your way, which is great. So thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed the videos, please consider subscribing to my channel. If you can give the video a thumbs up, I'd really appreciate that. And if you want to leave me a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching this video from, then it's always lovely to say hi. Or if you've got any other comments to make, then always happy to hear those. And I'll get this video uploaded and then we'll move on to the arms. Take care everybody, have a great day, happy stitching, bye.